Hello, intrepid followers, subscribers, and watchers of my YouTube videos. It's time for another cosplay in the Geekfort. And today's guest is Burden with Glorious Cosplay. Hi, Burden.
Hello.
Well, thanks for coming on the show today, Burden. I'm glad you got to join me and talk about your cosplay and all your creative stuff that you get to do.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's get into it. What led you to start cosplaying?
Well, really just being on the internet in like 2013, I saw some cosplay stuff, and then I went to my first Emerald City Comic Con in 2014, I believe, and saw a whole bunch of people dressed up and everything. And I've always been a big fan of Halloween, always loved dressing up for that and everything. And seeing that that was a thing that people could just do whenever because they wanted to was just super cool, and so I decided to do it.
Awesome. So then what was your first cosplay you made?
I my first one was Castiel from Supernatural. I thrifted that one entirely. It was all just stuff I got at a thrift store.
Cool. So I noticed in the picture, so that means everything, even the jacket, the tie, the shirt, and the pants, like the whole thing was thrifted?
Well, the shirt I had already. I just had a white shirt. Um, but yeah, all of the other stuff was all thrifted.
And what was that like wearing that like for the first time? Was it exciting or was it like nerve-wracking or like what were you feeling when you finally had it all together and ready to go?
I think that the first time I actually wore that was for Halloween, so it just sort of felt like Halloween. Um, but it was fun getting to wear it and everything and be a character that I really loved. And
So then what would you say is your favorite cosplay that you've created?
that one is the hardest question every single time anyone asks me. I don't know if I could say as far as like what my favorite one for like the creation process was, but like as far as like favorite cosplays that I've made like to wear, um basically just like the experience of them in general would be Ray, specifically the Last Jedi one with the gray vest. Poe, again, specifically Last Jedi, because I'm just really proud of how that one came out. And Caleb from Critical Role, just because I love his character and he's one of those characters that I just feel really comfortable in.
So when it came to let's talk about Ray first.
Yeah.
So tell me more about what that was like in the process and what was made or how did you make it and where you got all the stuff.
When I made that one specifically, the Last Jedi one with the gray vest and everything, that was during the brief period in my cosplay career where I was considering joining Rebel Legion. So I was trying to go for like as screen accurate as possible. I didn't succeed. I'm perfectly fine with that. And honestly, like I've moved past that. It's like Rebel Legion is super cool and everything, but I'd prefer to just do things how I want to and not stress myself out too much. So that was like one of the more research intensive costumes that I've done because that vest in particular has like so many details and so many ridiculous little things going on that it was just like so much research, and it was my first time trying to shop for real wool, and so I was like not sure where to look for that because up until that point I'd really mostly just been doing all of my fabric shopping at Joann's. So yeah, that one was just sort of one of my more intensive builds, and it was also one of my first times actually patterning because I had to actually take a pattern that I already had and like modify it like so that it was basically unrecognizable in order to do the vest pattern for that because there was just nothing that existed for it.
And when it comes to like the belt holster and the gun holster and the bracelets you're wearing, is that something you made or is that something you found and you like adapted?
Belt that I got on Etsy. The blaster I also got on Etsy, and then I made the holster myself because the blaster that I got was like a slightly smaller iteration of it. I have very small hands, so basically anything like that I have to be very particular so that it doesn't look oversized in my hands. So I made that holster myself in order to have it be the proper size for the blaster, which is 3D printed.
Oh wow, okay. Cool. So is that holster, is that leather or is that just another kind of fabric? Like what is it made of?
The holster I believe is suede.
So what's it like working with things? You talked about working with wool, and now you just talked about working with suede. What's it like working with those kind of fabrics as opposed to maybe just like a cotton fabric or a lycra?
Well, it can be a lot more stressful because they're a lot more expensive. And the like care instructions are very specific. Like normally when you get a bolt of fabric, when you get a cut of fabric, you pre-wash it. But with wool, you can't pre-wash it because it'll shrink and get all screwed up. So you're like, okay, this has to be very specific. And like with leather and stuff, it's like once you punch a hole, then it's like there's a hole in this now. It doesn't have a weave like a fabric does, where you can just sort of mush it back into place. So if you screw up, then it's a little more obvious.
Yeah.
Basically, it's just a bit more stressful, but it's also not as bad as you would expect.
So let's compare. I want to compare that to the holster then that you have for your Poe Dameron. Like, is that the same holster or a different holster? And did you make that one?
Oh, that one's a different holster. That one is made with leather rather than suede. So that one was just like a plain untanned, well, not untanned, unstained hide, and I used a water stain to make it the right color. Um, and so it would match the belt because that one was also a like belt blank that I got at Tandy Leather. Um, and so those are the same color of leather stain. And yeah, that one I also um, made myself. Um, Again, because I have smaller hands, I have a friend who 3D printed the blaster for Poe for me because all the ones that I was finding on Etsy were just like way too big for me. And he was like, "Hey, my wife's the same size as you. I can do this for you." I was like, "Thank you." So then, therefore, holster needed to be smaller than one that I might find already made.
So when it came to Poe Dameron, how much of that did you make, and how much of that did you find and purpose towards the cosplay?
For the Last Jedi one, I made pretty much all of it. The belt was, like I said, a belt blank from Tandy Leather and a buckle from Tandy as well. So that one was like one of the least made parts was the belt, and then the blaster that my friend printed for me, and then the boots. But yeah, I made the pants, the shirt, the jacket, all of that.
And like you talked about how you had to make things for your size. So when it comes to patterning, did you use like patterns that already existed to make those pieces, or did you have to like make your own patterns to fit your size?
For that one, for most of my projects, actually, I've been pretty lucky in that patterns do tend to go down in smaller sizes a lot. So I have honestly not had too much of a problem with things not being small enough unless I'm using one that's like specifically geared towards men, and then I sometimes have to do some fiddling, but sometimes that's the only thing you can find in the style that you want. But yeah, generally I've been pretty lucky as far as like sizing goes. Sometimes sizing will be a little weird within a pattern where it's like, oh, you do something according to your measurements. And I've had this problem, especially with pants, where it's just like, for some reason, the waistband just ends up not being the right size, even though you do the pattern exactly how you're supposed to with your measurements. So sometimes I've had to do some weird finagling with that kind of stuff. But yeah, other than that, I've been quite lucky with patterns.
Yeah, that's great. It's cool that you can able to find the things you need and then just adapt things from other things. So speaking of patterns and leather, let's talk about your Critical Role, the jacket for that character in Critical Role. What was it like making the jacket for that?
That was actually a stroke of luck. I had recently started watching Critical Role. I think this was in spring of 2019. So I was like probably like 5 episodes in, which seems like not a lot, but when the episodes are 4 hours long, it's a lot of content. But I really enjoyed Caleb's character, and I was planning on going thrifting just to, like, look for some other stuff anyway. And I found a coat that I was like, okay, this won't take a whole lot of work. It was a beige leather to begin with, and I was like, okay, I have a dark brown leather stain from doing my belt and holster for Poe. I can cut off some of the excess fur on like the cuffs on this jacket and stain this. So I got that, and I just stained the beige leather to dark brown. I just got super lucky. And the fact that it kind of looks kind of grungy is perfectly fine because that's how Caleb's cut's supposed to look.
I did not know you could then dye leather. I thought you had to buy it the color you wanted to use it. I didn't know you could dye it yourself. What's the process like of dyeing leather? Is it the same as anything you would do with other fabrics, or is it a little different?
It sort of depends on the method. Like there's like leather paints, like Angelus is a popular brand of leather paint where you can it's like a paint that's sort of like fabric paint where it's specifically made to be more flexible so it won't crack. So there's that. Or what I use for my Caleb coat or for my Poe leather goods is leather stain. So it's like a water-based stain. And you basically just like put it on a sponge and then like rub it in, just sort of buff it in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds almost more time consuming than boiling water and putting the stain in the water and then putting the fabric in the water.
Yeah, it's very time consuming, especially when you're doing an entire coat. It took a long time and a lot of leather stain to get that thing done. But honestly, it's kind of, in my opinion, a little easier. I mean, that's also because I haven't really done a whole lot of fabric dyeing, but it's like with fabric dyeing, you have to like have your like recipe just right. You have to have your amounts just right. But with like stain, you just scrub it on.
Nice.
Basically like painting
Yeah.
it.
So you said with the jacket you had there's the fur on the jacket. Did you have
Mhm.
to like fold that in and cover it so it didn't get stained, or did you put that fur on yourself?
The fur was already on there. There was some more on the cuffs of the sleeves that I cut off because he doesn't have furry cuffs. The one on the collar though, I think I just sort of like folded that out of the way.
Mhm.
I didn't really make too much of an effort to try and avoid it. It's like I avoided it, but I didn't make too much of an effort because, like I said, his coat's supposed to be pretty grungy. So if it got a little on there, then it's okay.
Well, it looks great. I love
Thanks.
all three of these, and it's so dynamic how you've made these things with leather too, because that's just something you're the first, I think you're the second person who I've had on the show that's talked about leather.
And it's
But
not
in
even
general,
my expertise at all.
well, yeah, it's great, but it's great that you tried to learn how to do that. So would you say that's been your biggest obstacle or the hardest part about cosplaying, or what would you say has been the hardest part for cosplaying, you think?
I mean, definitely like working with materials that I'm not familiar with and not as comfortable with is a challenge always.
Mhm.
And like I said, it can be really stressful working with things like leather just because it's like if you screw up and it's super expensive
Yeah.
and not easy to fix your mistakes. Whereas if you like sew a seam wrong in a cotton shirt, you can just seam rip it and you're okay. Um, so yeah, basically a lot of times it's mostly just like working with materials that I'm not familiar with and maybe not super comfortable with.
What has been the most ambitious cosplay you've created then, would you say?
It's not done yet,
Oh,
but that just goes to show how ambitious it is. But Molly Mock from Critical Role, I believe I sent you a picture of the coat for that. That coat was an undertaking. It took me like 2.5 years because I hand embroidered all of that. I didn't know how to embroider before making this costume, but I taught myself how for that coat. And yeah, that took me a really long time because I, I had to do all that embroidery and it took a long time just to do little things. And then I had to paint all of the lining and put it all together. And the costume's still not very close to being done yet because I still have to make a lot of the foundational pieces.
yeah, it's very ambitious what you've done. Just looking at the picture you have. So you're saying the white stripes, those are painted on?
The ones on the sleeves,
Yeah.
those are ribbons actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay. So the
the
parts you
moons on the
painted then are
lining are the painted.
the ones on the lower part of the coat, or what was the parts that were painted, you said?
The part on the blue lining, but yeah, there's like the dark blue lining, and then there's these like sort of silvery moons. Those
Oh,
I painted.
wow. Okay. So then the stuff that's embroidered are all those little like symbols along the edges and the circles and stuff?
Yeah, all the stuff on the red fabric is all of the embroidered stuff.
Oh, wow. And that took 2 years. And you said it's because you had the obstacle of trying to learn to embroider. So how did you what did you do to learn to embroider? Did you talk to someone? Did you watch videos? Where did you go to learn to embroider?
I Googled. I found a pretty good blog post with a very basic embroidery tutorial and used that to basically just sort of teach myself
Mhm.
how to do it.
Cool.
And for all the stuff that I was doing for that coat, I really just needed like a pretty basic embroidery stitch, so I didn't have to worry about anything too fancy.
Well, that's good. It was an easy, basic stitch. You didn't have to worry about learning so many big, elaborate things to put it together.
Yeah.
But it looks amazing. I can't wait to
Thanks.
see the final product. It's going to be great.
Me too. It'll
Yeah.
take me a little bit, but
Mhm. So would you say would you say then is if you're hitting an obstacle to creating, what helps motivate you to keep going when you're hitting an obstacle or you come to an obstacle? What gets you out of that?
it sort of depends. Sometimes it'll be just sort of revisiting the thing that the costume is from. So like if I'm working on a Ray cosplay and I am struggling and my motivation is starting to fail, then I can go and watch a Star Wars movie and it'll get me excited again. um, so that is a big thing for helping with that. Um, Other than that, sort of just stepping back, maybe working on something else, doing something else entirely. It's like, okay, I'm struggling with making this particular thing. I'm going to go read a book instead. Like sometimes just taking a step back is the best antidote.
So what would you say then is your favorite part about cosplaying?
Sort of like I don't know if there's like one specific thing. It's just like sort of the whole experience. Like there's the getting to watch something come from nothing into becoming something, getting to be part of that process, getting to hold a thing in your hands that you made yourself, getting to wear a thing that you made yourself, and then also getting to be my favorite characters.
So what kind of characters are you drawn to more? Like I noticed there's a lot of fantasy characters, and then there's the sort of sci-fi Star Wars characters. Like what about those characters like draws you to them?
Well, a lot of it is just the genres of media I consume. So I watch and read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi stuff. So that is a large part of my preferred characters to cosplay. Um, but yeah, a lot of what draws me is whether I like how I feel about the character. So if I am really attached to the character as a person, um, but then also the costume as well. Like if I really loved a character but I didn't really like their look, I would just say, okay, I just really like this character. But if I loved a character and their costume was baller, then I'd be like, all right, this is happening.
So what's been the one product that you found or the business that you found that's been really like your favorite or the thing that's been most helpful for your cosplaying?
That one is tricky because like I sort of grab from so many different places when I'm doing stuff.
Uh-huh.
Um, Etsy has been a really excellent resource as far as like finding things, whether it's like pre-made things like 3D prints, because that's not something that's in my wheelhouse. Um, there's lots of people selling so many 3D prints or just files, and then I will like, be like, "Hey, buddy, you want to print something for me?" um, so Etsy has been great for that. There's a lot of shops on Etsy that have unique fabrics, which for some of my costumes has been really helpful because I have a few that are pretty unique and not something that you find normally. Like what I finished recently, Kaz Brecker from Shadow and Bone, the fabrics for the vest, the black and silver brocade, and then the black and white striped back fabric. Those are both things that I found on Etsy because they're both so specific and so unusual that I didn't find anything else anywhere else that worked for that. But Etsy, there were some shops that had things that worked for that. It's also a really great place for buttons, and buttons are not easy to find in large quantities at places like Joann's. It's like you get like a pack of 3 at Joann's, and it's like, I'm making a shirt, I need more than that.
I didn't even think about buttons and how many that came in a pack and how to get them. That's such a great
Yeah.
resource.
Yeah, it's
That's
very
amazing.
helpful.
Yeah.
There's one particular shop, Ad Vintage. I have gotten a lot of buttons from them recently.
Uh-huh.
They have lots of large quantities of buttons, and you can get like different amounts depending on what you need. I have gotten several buttons from them in the last year just because they have really decently priced buttons and really nice ones. Like I've gotten some really nice mother of pearl buttons from them.
Oh, cool. Well, what we'll do is we'll put a link in the description for anyone watching the video to their site so that if they need buttons, they can find them there.
Yeah.
Cool. So I did want to bring up one thing I've noticed. You are doing a lot of characters that are gender bend. You're not sticking to like being a feminine or female character. You have Ray, but I've noticed a lot of characters you're doing are more identified as masculine. So tell me more about what's drawn you to want to do that.
Like I said before, I cosplay characters that I really love and connect to, and a lot of those happen to be male characters. And a lot of that is probably because of the large amount of well-written male characters in media, which then gets into a bit of sort of gender balance in stories and how there aren't always as many well-written female characters, and so it's like, okay, maybe I would cosplay more female characters if there were more that drew me in, but there are also still quite a few that do, like Rey and Black Widow and all that. So part of it is that, and also gender is just one of those things that I'm just sort of like, eh. So I'm like, I don't really care if I'm cosplaying a dude. I'm like, doesn't really matter to me. It's not really. I'm very loosey goosey about gender and have been for ages, so that's not really a deciding factor when I'm deciding. I'm like, I like this character, I'm gonna cosplay them regardless of how they identify.
I think that's great that you're looking at more as just this character speaks to you. You really think this character is fun, or it speaks to you on a level that doesn't have to do with gender, and you just go for it. And I love that. I think that's really great. And I agree. I sometimes will do a cosplay just because I like them and I don't care the gender of the
Hmm.
character. And I think that's great that you're willing to not let that be a boundary or a hindrance to you doing what kind of cosplay you want to do. That's great.
Yeah, it's, in my opinion, a fantastic way of doing it. That way you don't feel limited.
Yeah, not limiting yourself is great because it opens you up to things like you said earlier that you're just interested in doing and you like the character and then you find yourself learning like learning how to embroider. I
Yeah.
mean, what? And learning how to like the whole like leather thing. Like that's so like fearless to just be like, okay, I've got to make this thing and if I mess up, this is it. Well, I'm just gonna do it and see what happens. So that's really cool. So what's been your favorite con that you've been to?
I go to Emerald City every year, um, except for like twice since I've started going. I haven't gone, one because I was out of the country, and the other because it was the first Emerald City back after COVID and I wasn't sure yet. So Emerald City is like one of my main home cons. Always love going to it. It's a little overwhelming just because it's so huge and everything, but it's a lot of fun. But then I think my favorite con is probably Geek Girl Con, which is coming up real soon. I'm so excited for it to come back. Just because it's smaller and homey and just feels super comfortable. And I just always have a great time. And it's just sort of feels like hanging out. So it's much
Cool.
more low key. And there's always some really excellent artists there as well.
Nice. That's awesome. Is there a con you'd say you'd love to attend that you've never been to? And if there was like money and time was an issue and you could go, what con would that be?
Star Wars Celebration. Like, I know that that one can be a little bit like, people can be a little like, I don't know, because it's so huge and like all that, but like, I'd love to go and experience it just once. Because like, Star Wars is one of my main fandoms. I love Star Wars. And yeah, it'll be expensive whenever I manage to go, but something that I want to do just once in my life, just to have that experience.
What is one piece of advice you'd want someone new to cosplay to know about that you didn't realize that you think would be helpful for them?
But it's okay to start out small. I I did start out small doing cast first, which was smart because the costume that I got into cosplay wanted to do was Loki, specifically his Avengers outfit, which if you know that costume at all, you know it's a lot. And if you research it and really look at it, it's even more than you realize just by watching the movie. And I still have not made that particular iteration of Loki. I've done Ragnarok Loki, but yeah, the fact that that was the costume that I was like, this is what I want to do when I first got started, that was biting off more than I could chew. And it is okay to start small and do something that you just pop into a thrift store and find some stuff. It's okay. Like, it is actually preferable to do that and not spend as much time and money and stress to discover whether you even actually like this hobby before you sink all of this effort into it to make some elaborate monstrosity.
I think that's a great piece of advice to start small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, start small and build your way up. Because there are things that I have made now that I could not have made a couple years ago, and there are things that I want to make that I don't have the skills for yet, but I will work my way up to that because I will make things that are on a similar vein and get more complex as I go. It's
Yeah.
like just build your skills. You're not just gonna jump right into the deep end and learn how to swim. You're gonna start in the kiddie pool.
I think that's a great way of looking at it. So would you say of the skills you've learned so far, what's the one that you found like is helpful for every new cosplay that you've created?
Um, just sort of basic stitching, just like any sort of basic sewing skills. It's like obviously with sewing machine, like just being able to utilize that is helpful, but being able to hand sew is a really important skill because you end up needing it for certain things even if you're making most of a garment with a machine. It's like there'll be certain finishing things. It's how you sew on buttons, and also it's helpful for mending your regular everyday clothes. It's like, hey, you can get a lot more use out of your stuff if you know a little bit of hand sewing. Like, I've got a flannel that's been waiting for me to sew a button back onto it for a couple weeks.
So you brought up something I want to talk about is your Loki that you did make and what that process was like and your favorite part about Loki that you made.
Well, that was a crazy one. I'm not normally one for like the speed builds. Like like I said, that Molly Mock coat took me 2.5 years to make. Like, I make things slow, but um whenever it was that Ragnarok came out, I don't remember. Time is soup. Um I saw the movie like around ish when it came out, and then um some friends of mine and I were in a group chat and we're like, let's do a Ragnarok group for Emerald City. And it was like, that was in like November and Emerald City was in March. And it was like, okay, I'm gonna make an entire Loki costume. And I was one of the only people that actually like finished the costume for the group. So we didn't have much of a group. But yeah, and I had to do a lot of patterning for that because like the vest is bizarre and has all of the hallmarks of a not just a Marvel Cinematic Universe costume, but a Loki in the Marvel Cinematic Universe costume. Where it's just like this is going to be the most outrageous, like detailed, like you're going to want to die several times in the making. But somehow it's like I don't know if I just went into some sort of like tunnel vision thing, but somehow I managed it and didn't go too insane and didn't end up crying. Like somehow it worked out and I don't know how. But yeah, that one was a wild ride because I made it something that should have taken me a much longer time to make in only a few months. Like that
Yeah.
does not make sense to me how I managed that.
So what about it was the hardest part of making that cosplay?
Trying to figure out how to make the the vest and jacket situation work. The jacket for like the sleeves and everything, I just did a regular jacket pattern that I already had. But like the vest part that I put over it for like the diagonal stripes and like it's like there was all sorts of weird stuff going on with that. And so just trying to figure out the logistics of that and then like trying to figure out how to make that fit as a garment, how to put this on, how to get it on my body and not want to die. That was all rather a challenge. It's still not the most like structurally like I don't know. There are probably ways that if I had more time and had more skills at the time, would have done it differently, but it works, and I honestly would not try and do it again because it was challenging enough the first time. And it's like one of those things where it's like, okay, I have to, even though it's all pleather and not that comfortable, I have to put it on before I do wig and makeup because it won't fit over my head if I have a wig on. Even though I normally prefer to do that before I put the clothes on. But it
Yeah,
was an interesting thing to make, and it turned out cool.
I think it looks great, and I
Thanks.
appreciate you sharing that with me. So you've talked a little bit about patterns. So when it comes to patterns, if no one has ever heard of or know what a pattern is, can you tell us more about patterns and what that is and how you find them or make them?
The best place to start is with the like big companies. So like McCall's, Butterick, Simplicity. Um, those are like the best place to start because they are readily available and they have fairly easy to navigate websites. You can also find them at Joann's, and they often have sales at Joann's, which is the best time to buy them because patterns are outrageously expensive. But then when Joann's has pattern sales, they can be like $2 a pattern. So keep an eye out for those. So yeah, my best advice is start with looking at those. But then there's also lots of other places. Like sometimes you can just go on Etsy and type in like Victorian skirt pattern, and you'll find a whole bunch of things, like some which are based on like extant historical garments, and so you'll find like super fancy things, or you'll find similar that are just pretty basic. Um, Another really great resource is Mood Fabrics. They have a collection of free patterns that you can download and print, and those are pretty great. Actually used one for my Poe shirt, for my Last Jedi Poe, um, and it's pretty fantastic. So yeah, there's lots of different things out there, and then basically just like have an idea of what you're looking for. Look for things that are close. If you can't find the exact thing, then look for things that you can change. Look for things you can smush together. Look through your pattern collection if you already have one and be like, okay, well, this pattern has like the body of what I want, but this one has the sleeves of what I want. So I'm just going to stick the sleeves from that onto this. Frankensteining is your friend. And I made it a verb.
I think that's great. I never thought about like if you have like a pattern you want to do, like say you want to make a jacket and you're like, but you have certain sleeves you're looking for, but the pattern has the jacket doesn't have those sleeves, but this other thing has that. I think that's I never really
Yeah.
thought about that. Like, oh my
Sometimes
gosh,
you
I
run
could.
into little issues where it's like with my casual moon night that I did for Emerald City over the summer, the like white jacket, I had a slight issue where the armholes on the like body of the jacket were slightly larger than the armhole of the sleeves, which were from a different pattern. So it was like a little bit funky. So it's like sometimes you have that sort of thing, but usually armholes are like a bit more standard than that. So that was more of a weird thing. I mean,
Awesome.
like sometimes, like with the sleeves thing, sometimes you'll run into some issues where it's like, okay, these aren't exactly compatible. But like once you have skills under your belt as far as like sewing goes and patterns go, then you can figure out how to make things work, even if it's not necessarily compatible.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. All right, so last question. What is one charity or organization that is doing good in the world right now that you would like to people to know about?
Well, one that I've liked for a long time is the Trevor Project. They do really great things for LGBTQ people, and I just think that it's a really good organization. They help with struggling queer youth, and uh, I believe they have also like a suicide prevention program and all that. Like, it's just a really good thing that is definitely needed in the world right now.
That's great. I think that's wonderful. I'll put a link to the Trevor Project in the description below. Well, thanks for coming on the show today. I appreciate all the information you shared with us and all the great creative ways that you've made cosplays. Where can people find you on the internet? What's the best place for them to find you and see what you're doing?
Well, I post the most on Instagram, which would be at Burdened with Glorious Cosplay. I am also on YouTube, again, Burdened with Glorious Cosplay. Those are sort of my main places for stuff. So those would probably be the best places to find me online.
Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and your creativity. And again, all the links will be in the description. If you've watched this and you have a comment or a question, or you want to ask about what Burden Forth Cosplay is doing, or you really want to share what your favorite cosplay that they've made, just leave us the comment down below and let us know what you think. And as always, remember, cosplay
Cosplay is
is
for
for
everyone.
everyone. Thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks for coming. Bye.